We know that the Russians, very likely the Chinese, and other powers already have smuggled in nuclear devices into the United States. The weapon is probably already here. Their target priorities are a lot different now. They want to instill fear. They want to instill compliance. What you and I are getting as civilians, it's not the real story. There's been 2,221 nuclear devices detonated on the face of this planet. One nuke going off is not going to be the end of the world. The top people know it's survivable. Science and the math is absolutely clear. If you're going to want to survive what's coming up, you're going to have the desire to live, to protect your family. Well, why should I? There's no hope. Why should I prepare? I can't survive. I can't do this. Fear and the inaction that comes from it is the worst cancer you can give anyone.
World War III is already happening.
This is a house of cards, and it is in the process of collapsing right now.
You're going to see an economic crash, the likes of which we've never seen.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Today on the channel, it's an honor again to have Stephen Harris, who's the adjunct author of the Nuclear War Survival Skills book, widely regarded as the quintessential nuclear preparedness guide. He serves as a consultant to numerous corporations in the U.S. military, the Department of Defense, among others. He's also a dedicated science educator, recently contributed to an article for the Daily Mail, and is also the CEO of Knowledge Publications, a company focused on advancing hydrogen, biomass, and solar energy systems. Now, as you are the adjunct author of this book, what are your thoughts on potential nuclear scenarios? Like, realistically speaking, there's a lot of doomerism around, once they fire one nuke, it's going to be the end of the world, and you might not even prepare for it. What do you say to people of that mindset, and what are some scenarios you think that could potentially unfold?
Well, one, it's not 1984 anymore. We're not dealing with 20,000 weapons on each side and mutually assured destruction with the Soviet Union and the missiles flying over the North Pole. It's not that anymore. Get that out of your head. Their main goal is to have you acquiesce into whatever their interests are, not to flatten your cities. Not saying they might, not flatten one of your cities, as a show of, we're serious. The bear does bite, but all out nuclear war? No. One nuke. There's been 2,221 nuclear devices detonated on the surface, below the ground, and in space on the face of this planet since it came about, and the first one was done in 1945. 2,221, plus or minus a few. We're still here. So one nuke going off is not going to be the end of the world. And so the first thing is to say it's not 1984. Stop fighting and thinking about the past conflict. You got to think about fifth generational warfare, informational warfare, psychological warfare. It's going to be used as a terror device. Is it going to be smaller than Hiroshima? Is it going to be bigger than Hiroshima? What type of a device it is? And now you asked me about Annie Jacobsen, who wrote the book Nuclear War, which was the theoretical implementation. And you and I, we could come down and write 1,000 ideas for how it might start, and none of them will be correct. It'll be something else other than what we thought of. But the exercise, yes, is a good exercise to think about, but it's going to be probably a singular event or multiple events over in the European theater. They might just hit Berlin, and because Germany stopped supplying them with weapons, or it might be London, or it might be the North Sea as a demonstration where there is no one. It could be a variety of those situations. But as many other authors, actually, the idea of North Korea in Jacobsen's book launching an intercontinental ballistic missile that's going to take 30 to 45 minutes to fly across the pole and in the Pacific and come and hit the United States is really pretty unrealistic, because you should go read her other book, Surprise, Kill, Vanish. And you'd understand that the intelligence apparatus of the major countries, first world countries, is too damn good. we're going to know they're getting ready. We're going to know they're preparing. And, we have ways of intercepting in space, under the sea and many other places, a weapon taking that long to get here, and let alone interdicting it on the ground before it even launches. So it's not like they're just going to have one sitting there and like our Minuteman missiles and go, okay, launch, and blast door goes by and it goes up and it's on the way and we got nothing to do to shoot it down. So what's a much more likely scenario for the United States is what Tom Clancy put forth in many of his books, and is probably very, very true. Remember, I learned all this from Tom Clancy, is that the weapon is probably already here. We know that the Russians, very likely the Chinese and other powers, already have smuggled in nuclear devices into the United States. They aren't that big. If they smuggle in all the drugs and everything else they can smuggle in a nuclear device. Think of it about the size of you or me. They can smuggle that in. It doesn't give off a lot of radiation. It's very hard to detect, and it can be very stable for a long period of time. So is it possible that North Korea already has one here? Yeah, it's possible. And if they want to attack DC, they don't need to send an intercontinental ballistic missile all the way across the world over to us. All they got to do is drive a truck into downtown DC and clock it off. Or New York, or Atlanta, or Houston, or Los Angeles. I don't think Alberta is really on the target list.
Saskatchewan, actually, but hey.
Sorry, Saskatchewan. I didn't mean to insult you.
Same
Sorry,
thing.
Saskatchewan.
Yeah, we're Alberta's little brother, or we actually were the ones who populated most of the country, but everybody leaves here when they grow up and they realize that, things called cars exist. So you said something.
Speaking of which, did we mention I am in my nuclear shelter? I am broadcasting to you from my fallout shelter that's been in my house that I built in 1999. This is not a blast shelter. It's in the basement. Here's the concrete wall. There's the concrete wall. And there's 4 foot by 8 foot structure with all of my food and other supplies all the way around it, providing the radiological shielding along with the dirt and the concrete on each side, which is the thing that we have that as a basement. Whereas down south, they don't have basements. But wow. I am actually, I don't just talk the talk. I walk the walk. I am in my shelter that's 26 years old.
And so, I mean, that's a testament to the fact that you can build a shelter within a basement, as we call them up here, if you have them. So you don't need to go to the extent of building a full-on bunker per se. I mean, that might benefit you in circumstances where you're closer to a potential blast zone, possibly.
Yeah, blast radius. But then again, the target map has already changed. And most people don't realize this, but you know what the target list was back in the 80s? The first targets...
The Minuteman missile silos, primarily.
The missile fields. And the next targets were...
Air bases.
The 5 mile long runways. And the third target?
Naval ports.
It's all the major road and rail intersections in the United States. The military kill chain is find, fix, finish. So they know where you are. They fix you. You can't move. They take out all your road junctions and everything else, which usually happen to be in and around major cities. And so thus the city gets flattened, right? But if it's like, if you want to attack like a refinery, one of the big ones down in Texas, why do you need to attack that when your other attacks have probably broken all of the feed lines going to it of oil from all the other different sources? The refinery without an input or without power is no good. So yeah, find, fix, and finish. And I've literally, Nate, you've heard of stories like people write to me and they go, "Oh my God, there's a bike store 3 blocks down from my house and it'll be the only source of transportation in a nuclear war. So I know that they're going to target it. What do I do?" And Yeah, you got to realize our their target priorities are a lot different now. They want to instill fear. They want to instill compliance. So it's going to probably be in the European theater or someplace, or I can migrate here, but one nuclear device, half a dozen nuclear device. I would say it's very reasonable to say one would go off 1 month and 6 would go off the following month. Because it's like Bitcoin breaking 100,000. It's like, okay, sky's the limit, right? It resisted, then it broke through, and now it's fluctuating, above. Once you've broken that limit, it's kind of like asking the girl out for the first date. It's hard. And then once you do, it's like you have a great date. It's like, hey, do you want another date? You want to go out again? Yeah, sure.
So you don't think that it necessarily entails a mutually assured destruction scenario? And then there's the one other point that I wanted to comment on with respect to shooting down ICBMs. I mean, some people will dispute the fact that if North Korea was to fire an ICBM, that we would have the ability to shoot it down. Obviously, it's traveling at Mach 20 or whatever it is. You'd have to intercept it, I presume, in the early phase, which the U.S. has assets in the region.
We've already intercepted an incoming satellite. Remember the satellite that was deorbiting early that had like 2 tons of hydrazine on it? And they modified one of our THAAD, theater high altitude air defense missiles on an Aegis class weapons cruiser. They already intercepted an incoming satellite.
How fast is the satellite going?
Orbital speed. 18,600 miles per hour. So yeah, we've demonstrated the ability in open source to intercept in multiple phases.
Okay, so I guess, but this is a system that could be overwhelmed.
Sure.
I mean, looking at what the Iranians did in Israel, where they were easily able to overwhelm. I mean, now they have the THAAD system there, so we don't know how that's going to play out, but they only have something like 100 interceptors that they could use at any given time. So, presuming that North Korea has enough decoys, I guess. Anyways.
I doubt they have 2,000 missiles.
Yeah, I mean,
or even 200.
The question is do we have that many THAAD systems, right? And what is according to Annie Jacobson, there's something like 42 of these interceptors that are currently active in the United States, but
the better question about North Korea is them being a trigger point. Mm-hmm. What happens if they just attack South Korea or Japan? Okay, let's say they're the bad boy on the block. They're the loose cannon. So they go ahead and do something. Then China and Russia piles on thereafter. North Korea opens the door and everyone else pours through. In the midst of the confusion, that is a better scenario.
Yeah, it's not going to be an isolated incident, that's for sure. With respect,
everyone's looking for an excuse.
With respect to the mutually assured destruction hypothesis, I think your idea is quite novel with respect to having nuclear weapons pre-positioned is something that seems to escape the imagination of most people nowadays, despite the fact that I believe it was the basis for the TV show Jericho, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And probably many a Tom Clancy novel as well. But yeah, this is an angle that many of us have perhaps forgotten about. But wouldn't that not lead then to a broader exchange?
If it was a surprise, if it was smuggled in and hidden, they're going to want to first find out whose it was. And they can do that by measuring the radioisotopes after the explosion. In fact, they can already go right down and say, yeah, this was our plutonium produced in Hanford and cell number 32 in 1984. I mean, they got such good isotope records and what is produced from that they can actually identify. It's like, this has the signature of a Chinese weapon. This has a signature of a Soviet weapon, made here. This has a signature of another one. And it's like, okay, let's find out whose it was first. The damage has already been done. We got to do a reaction to that. Let's put our shields up, sorting out all of our ships with all our THAAD and every other protection mechanism we have, get the intelligent apparatus going in even a higher gear, and find out exactly who did this, why, and then do a measured appropriate response. I mean, it's like if I walked up to you, Nate, I go, "Hi, Nate, how you doing?" Boom. I knock you right in the nose and you're bleeding. And that's all I do is you're going to like, "Steve, why'd you hit me?" You know? I mean, think about it logically. You want to know, why did that crazy thing just happen? Who did it? I could have been wearing a baklava, you know? And you want to pull it off and see who did it to you. So I don't think there's going to be a lot of knee jerk, but like I said, go read Andy Jacobson's other, books, Surprise, Kill, Vanish, and maybe you'll understand that missile probably would have never taken off.
But when you look at something like 9/11, I mean, there definitely was a knee-jerk reaction there. So if we're talking about something on a scale much bigger than that, I imagine that plausible deniability or not, they're going to hold somebody to account, and the American people will demand a proportional response. So, you would presume that there would have to be some escalation. But like you, I think that what's been demonstrated in the past few years seems to be that a lot of us thought that there were all these red lines which would immediately elicit a nuclear reaction. And clearly we're in a situation now where Ukraine's firing missiles, with the assistance of NATO, at Russian soil on numerous oblasts, now 3, I think, in total so far, with just ATACMS. And obviously a lot of the ISR stuff is feeding into their use of these drones to do deep strikes, even past Moscow and St. Petersburg. So, this leads me to believe that perhaps there's more rungs of the escalation ladder than we initially thought, that perhaps the use of a tactical nuke or a demonstration won't necessarily go to the full-on nuclear war extent. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, what about the theory that Russia's nuclear arsenal is as good as their conventional arsenal? Woefully inadequate, not up to date, and questionable functionality. Why are they playing a game of Bugs Bunny and Yosemite Sam of "I dare you to cross this line"? No, I dare you to cross this line. No, I dare you to cross this line. They keep on doing it. I can say one thing is for certain, Nate. What you and I are getting as civilians, I mean, even through the best open source intelligence and everything else and videos and Twitter, it's not the real story. It's not what is really happening. It's not the real motivators. It's not the real objectives of what people are after. We're just dealing with what we're fed and that we can see, and the behind the scenes stuff is going to be completely different situation, which we're not going to really know until after an event.
What did you think of the Russian Reznik demonstration?
Real interesting demonstration. 6 warheads coming down out of the sky. Albeit conventional, but they definitely said, these things work. We can target a location and we can hit it with multiple independent reentry vehicles, multiple warheads. That's a theater scale missile, not an intercontinental ballistic missile.
And do you think that changes the equation at all?
The best thing I can say, Nate, is we can't set a date for something to happen. Okay. It's like, it can't be the election. It can't be the inauguration. It can't be this date or that. Historically, I mean, look back through our history from 9/11 to the fall of the Soviet Union to Pearl Harbor to the Cuban Missile Crisis. It has all pretty much been out of the blue as far as we're concerned. Not anticipated, not seen. Now, if you want to prepare yourself, and I did this, I refreshed all my supplies and everything else and made sure I topped off everything before the election. Did I think anything was going to happen during the election? No. Did I think something is going to happen when I least expect it? Yes. Did I use that date as like an internal motivator deadline for me to, get this, double check this, make sure this works, make sure I have these are labeled, these are, all functional. And it's like, do I have enough cat treats for my cat for a year? Yes. Okay. It's just little things like that to double check. But whatever happens, it is going to be out of the clear blue sky. I mean, did you have the fall of Assad in Syria on your 2024 bingo card this year, Nate?
Absolutely not. But I just made a video about this very topic and how these things seem to be happening at just a lightning pace and always out of the blue. So for that reason, these are reminders that we should expect the unexpected. And it's a constant reminder of how quickly things can change and deviate from the path.
They're the number one fundamental thing behind human evolution and human change is communications. The faster you communicate, the faster you change. The faster you change, the faster you communicate. Communications and information flow and change is rapid. Look at what we've done in 25 years since 2000, as compared from 2000 to 1975. We didn't even have the personal computer off the shelf in 1975. And in 2000, it was the dot-com bubble and computers were wildly available everywhere. And now we're dealing with computers that, we're carrying around in our pocket. Basically this is computational power of a cray. This little phone right here of mine, I got 2 terabytes of storage built into this thing. 2 terabytes. I remember talking to an Intel engineer. He goes, in 1969, we were just trying to hopefully to get memory down to $1 a bit, not a byte, a bit. So yes, very good observation. Things are changing quickly. We're going to have more change in the next 10 years, next 10 minutes, next 10 months, than we have in 5 times that in the past. Obviously. Things are moving. And another good example of this, here's another one for you for your nuclear scenarios. You know why we use uranium-235 in our nuclear power plants, right?
Absolutely not.
Because you get plutonium-239 from it. And these are the items that you use to make nuclear devices. Now, if we took all the geniuses that made our first nuclear device and we wanted to say there was no World War II and we want to do this thing called nuclear power, we probably would have started off with thorium and uranium-233 that you can't make into a weapon because it's more efficient, more plentiful, more economic. Taiwan has had a nuclear power plant for 40 years. What do you think they've been doing? Ukraine has had a nuclear power plant going all the way back to the Soviet Union. It is, in fact, Peter Zion, the economist and analyst from Stratfor and of independent fame, he estimates that Taiwan could have a nuclear device in a few weeks. They already got all the material. It's just some assembly required, and the assembly of a nuclear device is pretty straightforward. It's getting the material that's hard. They estimate Ukraine could have one in like 3 or 4 months as well. They got the material. They've been harvesting it out of their reactors for all these decades and refining it and stockpiling it. They just haven't assembled it into a device yet.
So you're saying that we're using a type of nuclear fuel that was designed for weapons and it's less efficient?
It is absolutely designed for weapons. If you go to the French breeder-style reactor, we only use a fraction of a percentage of our fuel that we put into our nuclear reactors today. In fact, there's not one that's been duplicated. There's always been another development in the reactor that they've done in all of them. The Canadians made breeder reactors, and what they did is they used up like almost the entirety of the fuel. All this thing what we call nuclear waste that we have outside of all the nuclear power plants and in Yucca Mountain, everywhere else, all of that can be fed back into a breeder reactor to make more electricity. Ask any nuclear physicist. It's pretty straightforward. And most of the times that stuff that is, quote, waste, which is really, waste, I did an intro to a book that said why waste is good. And when you have waste, you have an abundance of something. You're making it and using it so good that you have an abundance, and that abundance becomes a resource. Well, usually that waste has too much of plutonium-240 in it, which very much wants to stop the fissile rate. It wants to, what's the word I'm looking for? It wants to go off early, so it wants to fizzle. It wants to have the nuclear reaction is going towards criticality, and then out of nowhere comes a stray neutron, and the whole thing goes, and you get, 1/100th your yield. And 240 is not good for making implosion device where 239 is. So a lot of our waste fuel may very well have that in it, but it can still be used in other methods to make energy for the entire world. And it's just being stored in large casks safely in a secure environment, waiting for us to utilize a waste as a resource in the future. Someday we will be mining our landfills as well.
And so what about Iran? Are they using this nuclear grade type of fuel, like nuclear weapons?
They are making uranium-235 with centrifuges. Now, here's a fun story, because one of my mentors who was at Los Alamos in 1940s, and he's the one actually who set the time for the first atomic weapon. He was telling me the story of exactly why did we do uranium-235 at Oak Ridge National Laboratories right next to Tennessee Valley Authority, which is hydropower, massive hydropower. It's because you need a great deal of electricity to run these gas centrifuges in order to separate. See, you want uranium-235, and it is 0.7% of uranium-238. Well, as far as you and I are concerned, it's the same chemical, even though it's a different isotope. So it's hard to separate. So you turn it into a gas and you spin it around, and the heavier gas goes to the outside, the lighter gas goes to the inside, and you do the gas separation that way. But we only had one device in World War II that was a gun-type weapon. It was two pieces of 235, one shot into the other. Here's a piece of history. You know what the propellant was that shot one half of 235 into the other half of 235 to do Hiroshima?
Not a clue.
Black powder. Black powder and a Navy artillery cannon, specially machined and made for it. But anyways, they were going to do the project, and they just discovered they didn't have enough copper. There wasn't enough copper in the United States to make the cyclotrons to run them at Oak Ridge off of power from TVA. They needed more wire. So do you know where they got the wire?
I have no answers to these questions, Steve.
They went to Roosevelt and said, hey, we need to borrow the silver from the U.S. Mint, our silver reserves. And it's like, you can't have it. It's like, we're not going to destroy it. We're just going to turn it into wire. And they made the wire for the cyclotrons out of our silver reserves. And then when we were done with that, we gave them back the silver, and they melted it back down into bullion, and it was part of our silver reserve for our currency. But it took a tremendous amount of energy to make that first 235 device, which is why they went to a plutonium type device for weapons 2, 3, 4, and 5, because they could make multiple, I think it was less than 10, not more than 10, but greater than 5 a year.
Are you saying then that because Iran is in possession of this 235, it's not as easy to make a nuclear bomb?
Oh, it's much easier to make it with 235. Yeah, okay, it's harder to make the 235. It's just
more.
It's easier to make the device.
It requires more energy? That's what you're saying.
There was actually more energy used in electricity to separate the 235 from the 238, from the electricity from the dams of the TVA, than there was in all the energy released in Hiroshima. That includes the light, the radiation, the blast, everything. there was more energy. And so I said to Ed, I go, so you're telling me Hiroshima was basically a water bomb? He thinks, and he looks at me and he giggles. He goes, yeah, it was kind of a water bomb because there was many times more electricity used to make the 235 for that first device. Remember, this was the first one. Than there was that in the device itself. A little bit of history for you.
Interesting. So in terms of what you think that Jacobson's book might be getting wrong in terms of mutually assured destruction, because we are told that nuclear war is going to make life unsustainable afterwards. And I recently did a video on this, and I think it says in the Nuclear War Survival Skills book, part of the reason why this theory was floated was in fact by our adversaries who were trying to demoralize people and get them to not prepare so that we would be less prepared and we would just, cease in our preparations while they continued to build out their civil defense infrastructure.
The amount of myths, if you go on the Daily Mail website and you read the myths, I picked out 3 pages, some of the best ones, because there's myths in the book, but I picked out what people actually said this week of why and categorize them, for our conversation. So we could talk about the scenarios and then talk about the myths. Sure. Because I think Jacobson's book is a very legitimate scenario. There are flaws in it. Yeah. Am I an expert, in launching missiles at the USA? No. Could Jacobson be right? Yes. Could part of her be right? Yes. Did she write a good book? Absolutely, she wrote a good book.
So in terms of nuclear winter then, can you maybe expand a bit on what we discussed in that video and why it's an unlikely scenario?
All the nuclear devices can't compete with Mount Pinatubo. Okay, their volcanoes will change the climate of the Earth for like a year and a half, and have historically done that. But the amount of power released from a volcano erupting like those big ones, it makes what man does look infinitesimal in power. So,
So why do you think then...
What was your main question?
Well, the main question was with respect to nuclear winter, and you kind of answered it with respect to the volcanoes.
The idea was the nuclear device would go off, the mushroom cloud would go up, it would create a great deal of fires, because when it goes off, you have prompt a prompt light pulse, which induces, heat into everything it hits, Terminator, it's like you're going to need 2 million sunblock because it's going to be an awfully bad day. It catches stuff on fire, to a significant radius measured in miles, anything from curtains to dried leaves to whole structures. And then the blast wave comes by. And the thermal pulse for starting fires is actually larger than the blast wave pulse to blow out your windows. So you create square miles of fire, okay? And all that smoke goes up in the atmosphere. All that smoke is basically carbon. And, for all intents and purposes, it's unburnt stuff that goes up in the air. And so a lot of it is going to be pure carbon, just like charcoal, black. And the idea is it goes up the upper stratosphere and blocks out the sunlight, cools the planet, and you have a winter and everything. Well, there just isn't enough of it.
So if, let's say, what is the threshold for a nuclear winter scenario? Like, is it the detonation?
There isn't one. There's not
bombs?
enough. There wasn't enough devices when we had 20,000 devices each.
So you're saying that if all 20,000 nukes went off simultaneously,
40.
If let's say all 40,000 went off, which now would be probably closer to 10,000.
Yep.
Let's just presume, 10,000 nukes go off within a short period of time. You don't think that's sufficient smoke to block out the sun to any significant extent?
Science is clear. Science and the math is absolutely clear.
Why is this myth still being perpetuated then? Because this is now entered the common, language of people, and people are presuming that is just the de facto outcome.
You're the one with a psychology degree. Tell me why people keep on believing false and stupid things.
Well, I mean, there's a few theories, I guess, but I mean, I think it's not so much that people are believing it; it's that it's being promoted by the media and the government, essentially, or the government is sort of tacitly promoting it by not saying this isn't actually the case when they should.
They did say it. The original Nuclear War Survival Skills was published by Oak Ridge National Laboratories, written by Creston Carney. That's a division of the U.S. government. It says right in the book, underneath Misc, nuclear war is false.
But while this myth is being perpetuated in the I guess just in the media, that nobody's stepping in to say, actually, this is untrue, because I think that puts people in a fatalistic mindset where it discourages them to take the precautions because they don't think it's survivable, which doesn't serve the public interest from a civil protection standpoint. So
same thing with EMP. I call EMP the boogeyman of the nuclear world. It's what everyone's scared of, and that's what's least likely to happen. And everyone puts it to a test. Is like, lose it EMP proof? Well, then I don't want it. And what do they end up doing? They end up talking to themselves going, well, why should I? There's no hope. Why should I prepare? I can't survive. I can't do this. And they end up finding reasons not to. Fear in the inaction. Remember this. Fear in the inaction that comes from it is the worst cancer you can give anyone. Maybe that answers the question about nuclear winter, mutually assured destruction, 1984 scenarios. How many people are talking about hope? How many people are talking about, the spirit? I got another guy in here who comments about, there'll be destruction, but, the spirit of everyone will come together and solutions will be found. People will be evacuated out of Britain. And, ships will just show up. And remember in 9/11, the ferries? The ferries just started hauling people off of Manhattan left and right and across the Hudson. Hell, even the Miracle on the Hudson, they came running.
I would say that's, well, I appreciate the optimism. I think that might be a little overly optimistic. Jacobson might make the argument that it's better to scare the living daylights out of people so that, and I'm not saying that this is something I agree with, so that governments will, be less likely to utilize that option. Because if people think it's survivable, or if a military general who's in charge of overseeing whether or not to launch, if he thinks that it's survivable, there's a greater chance then that he might push that button or go, use that option.
They know it's survivable. The top people know it's survivable, yet it is cataclysmic. And no one wants to be the one that does that first. No one wants to be the one with that video on Twitter or X and everything of the mushroom cloud going up over Los Angeles. So no one wants to be the one that does that. It is unthinkable. And the thing is, there are things by far worse than a nuclear device. I keep on telling people they aren't that big. We're talking about square miles of destruction. We're talking about a radius of less than 10 miles, usually less than 5 miles. The weapons are a lot smaller today because we're more accurate, and they're expensive as hell. So why would you want to put all that material to make a 5 megaton weapon when you could use all that material to make 20 quarter megatons that you can put right on X marked spot? The people making these things aren't dumb. They have a budget too, even though it's a big one. Right. And so they aren't as big as they used to be. And even then, it's not bigger. There are only 2 threats to humanity on the face of the planet. One is an asteroid coming in and doing what it did to the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. The other threat is a virus. That can kill more people than anything else. You go ask the scientists what keeps them up at night? Go read Ken Albeck's book from 96 called Biohazard. He was the chief biological warfare scientist for the Soviet Union that defected in 95 or 94, and he wrote the book Biohazard in 96. He outlines Russia's weaponized everything, weaponized smallpox, weaponized tularemia, weaponized anthrax, weaponized bubonic plague, pneumonic plague. And you ask any of the scientists that deal with mass destruction and threats to the public, you ask them what keeps them up the most at night, it's a biological viral weapon. I mean, let alone, it's not just against us. I mean, there's agricultural bioweapons. They can go after our poultry. They can go after our cows with hoof and mouth, which is even more frightening than, looking at chickens and poultry. There's something called wheat rust. They can go after our wheat, our corn, our forms of subsistence and everything else. And, literally the Bible is full of plagues and locusts and, other such things that devastated entire countries and communities. The Irish potato famine.
Well, that's interesting because to me, what you're saying means that they are potentially more likely to utilize that option because they know that it is something that is not going to be as globally catastrophic. I mean, Stephen Harris.
It'll be more globally catastrophic.
Said it here first. Stephen Harris said it here first, folks. He said that, after they launch the first nuke, they're going to tweet about it on X. So he's not of the belief that the EMP. So tell us a little bit about why you don't think EMPs are a threat.
Well, it's in the list of myths here, and they're saying, nuclear device go off, it's going to be an EMP effect, everything else. There is an EMP effect from a firecracker. You can put a firecracker in a plastic trash can, wrap wire around it, put a voltmeter on it, set off the firecracker. It creates a high temperature plasma on Earth's magnetic field, and you can measure it through the pickup wires and make the needle on your meter go bloop when it goes off. The radius of an EMP on a surface or an airburst above a city, so I'm talking thousands of feet, okay, not hundreds of miles of feet. And the EMP effect is less than the blast wave. So it's like bright light, your radio goes off, and then the blast wave blows you down the road at 600 miles an hour. So what you're talking about, though, is an EMP at like twice the altitude of the space station. And it has to be a big one, a big device that actually depresses the Van Allen radiation belts through the Earth's magnetic field, creating all sorts of hell. And if that was done to the United States, you would kill. If you did a Soviet level EMP, and people go, I got this EMP bag. I got a Mylar bag. I got an EMP shield. As soon as the EMP goes off, I'm going to pull out my phone and have my videos and my TikTok and everything else. And it's like, you don't understand that as soon as you pull it out of your bag, there's another one going off tomorrow. An EMP is not a singular event. It's a multiple event. It's today, tomorrow, in 4 days, next week, at the end of the month. They keep on putting more of them out. Why it doesn't harm the military is because they have what's called HEMP, hardening against electromagnetic protection. If you've ever seen an emitter radio and how big it is versus like a Baofeng radio is this big, a military emitter radio is like this big, right? That's because all of the electronics in there have metal oxide varistors and other protection devices literally on every leg of every silicon piece in that entire radio. So when it sees a voltage higher than is acceptable on that lead, it clamps down on it and shorts it to ground, thus protecting the electronics. So it can survive pulse after pulse after pulse after pulse after pulse. They don't shield really in F-16. It's hardened against an electromagnetic pulse to begin with. But I mean, good God, see, the people, they know it will kill 98% of the population of the United States in a year. If an EMP hits from San Diego to Maine, what do you think the response of the United States is going to be?
An EMP expert I just spoke to said that while it's true that the military equipment is hardened, that they still rely on the U.S. power grid. So while it might be true that their devices will still function, will they have electricity to power it is the question in that scenario you're talking about.
Yeah, they got their own power. They do have their own power systems for critical infrastructure. I was actually in Cheyenne.
They have backup power, but their primary power source is.
I was in Cheyenne Mountain. I saw what they have. Okay, it's
right.
gargantuan.
Well, that's continuity of government. That's not like the general military. Like the general military is attached to the civilian power grid. They might have diesel backup generators, but yeah, sure. Like what you're talking about is something that who knows? I mean, Cheyenne Mountain is. I mean, we could speculate on that if you want in terms of what else is out there now. I presume that there's a lot bigger complexes than Cheyenne Mountain nowadays. But
well, Cheyenne Mountain was a command center. I mean, I can, one way to know if someone was really at Cheyenne Mountain, you ask them the name of the ducks on the ponds of water that are stored underneath the mountain.
The ducks.
But they have their own power. Some places have their own hydropower. And that's just not going to stop. I mean, the military isn't worried about, losing its power. Hell, the military doesn't even have shelters on major bases for its enlisted, for the people on the base. I was just up at the air show working for Air Force Association, and I was on the Selfridge base, and there's no shelters. There's no shelters up there. There's no shelters. And it was one of the first air bases in the United States. There's no shelters for the general military. It's one of those long runways. They figure it's going to be gone.
So you're saying that EMP from the nuclear blast, air burst, ground burst, not a big deal, but it is a legitimate threat from a high altitude.
From a spatial one and it's not a small nuclear device, it's a gargantuan nuclear device. They got to get it up there.
How many megatons do you figure it'd have to be?
Someplace in megatons. And we just recently, I think, proved in open source that North Korea actually created a fusion device rather than a fission device, which is monumental because the people that taught me that literally a fusion device like the Teller-Ullman design is 1,000,000 times harder and 1,000,000 times more expensive than a fission device. So for North Korea to pull off a legitimate fusion device, which according to all of the external readings of our measuring of what they did underground, says it was too damn big of a device to have been a simple fission device. Even though we've made fission devices bigger than smaller fusion devices, it's just a lot of material and it's very expensive. So the likelihood of them going to that level, I mean, they can't even keep the lights on for the country. If you look at the satellite photos of North Korea, where do you think they're going to get the electricity to make all the material for a fusion device? But can they get material from other countries? Yeah.
So
do they have the will? Yeah. Will they find a way? Possibly.
Mm-hmm.
Do they have devices now? Yes. Does Pakistan? Yes. Does India? Yes. I think even South Africa does.
So just so people remember that we're referencing a lot of this stuff. Stephen's the adjunct author of this book, and there's a chapter right at the beginning called Nuclear War Myths. And so if anybody thinks that Stephen's talking out of his butt, go and read that book and you'll quickly realize that he's not. Okay. And
you can get the book for free at that website, nuclearwarsurvivalskills.com. The original version is free to download. There's no sign up. There's no funnels, no tricks, no nothing. Go get the original version. And if you like it, you can get the updated version that I spent God knows how many months writing from Nate at Canadian Preparedness.
It really is a good book. I mean, it really is a great book. People really need to, just open a few pages and you'll quickly see what I mean. It's very
the first
easy.
34 pages of the original book. If you do anything, just read the first 34 pages of the original book.
So in terms of myths, then, we've talked about a few things. Is there any other really big myths that irritate you when you hear people talking about it?
Nate, it all boils down to this. People find reasons not to. And when COVID started, I developed a saying. I guess ended up being very blunt and very blatant to people. And I'd say, shut up. Stop finding reasons not to do it. Start finding reasons to do it. If you're going to want to survive what's coming up, albeit a hurricane, an earthquake, an ice storm, your neighbor, going crazy in your car with a bat, you are going to have the want. You're going to have the desire to live, to protect your family. For those that you love, you're going to have the want, the confidence of yourself. And it's like, this is a hill you're dying on. Look at the people in North Carolina and Georgia that were hit with the catastrophic flooding effects of what wasn't even a major hurricane that dumped all the rain in that area. I mean, the way you know this from your education, how do you unite a squabbling village or tribe or population? You give them an external threat. You have to have faith in your common person, in your neighbor. Everyone around you is a resource. And I came up with a saying that I got famous for back in the survival podcast days. And I said, it is easier to feed your neighbors than it is to shoot them. Of course, one person comes up to me and goes, I noticed you didn't say not to shoot your neighbors, but it's just easier. I go, yeah, it's easier. What are your neighbors, Nate? Is one an electrician? Is one a nurse? How far away does a doctor that lives? Okay, an electrician, a plumber, anyone, a car mechanic, any one of the skilled trades or the engineerings and the sciences. How many of these people make up your personal community? It's through all of them and with them that you survive. Now, you might be eating your wonderful freeze-dried food that you have. You'll have beans and rice and corn for them. And believe me, if they don't eat it on day one, they'll happily eat it on day two. So there's nothing to say you got to have all of your preparedness for everyone else. But first thing I did on 9/11 is I went and withdrew the last $180 I had to my name out of the bank in 2001. And I went north by about 30 minutes to a grain elevator. And I spent, I think, $109 or $89. I got 600 pounds of corn, and I brought it back in my pickup truck because we had no idea what was coming next. Were those planes trailing a biological out their rear as they were flying into the World Trade Centers? We didn't know. And I went up and I got that extra corn because corn compared to wheat is very affordable, and it's also very flexible. And sorry, I'm sitting Indian style in my shelter and my legs are falling asleep. But I went out and bought 600 pounds of corn for my neighbors, for myself and everyone else, because I had everything and the knowledge and the grinders and everything to turn that into food for those around me.
Well, you're talking about budgetary constraints on people, and that's something a lot of people can relate with nowadays. And I think it was quite timely that you partook in that article for the Daily Mail entitled How to Survive a Nuclear Apocalypse for 72 Pounds. So what were some of the tips that you provided people in that article?
He priced in everything. He priced in a 22-pound shovel. Everything is taxed over there and everything else. So he priced in a 22-pound shovel and a saw.
Well, a third of that was a shovel?
Yeah, I mean, a pound is worth more than $1.
So the shovel is to dig an emergency.
Oh, yeah, he priced that in. He put a number in the title to grab people's attention.
Okay. So
which was a good idea.
Yeah, and in the book, you explain to people how you can dig a hole to survive it.
Yeah, I mean, I told him, I go, look, you really, they call backhoes JCBs in England, okay? I go, look, if something's really coming, what you really want to do, you want to have an extra copy of the book, a couple extra copies, You get your neighbors together and everyone else. You go find a guy that has a backhoe, like a landscaping company. And I already identified all of them around me in the 90s when I was doing a lot of this work. And I had it on a map of who had what, great big backhoes, like the ones you see on Gold Rush for digging gold. I went and identified them, and there's football fields, like American football fields, not soccer. Now there's soccer fields too, all around me at different schools. And it's like, just start digging a trench with that great big hoe. It's so easy with that thing. It's like about 3-4 feet wide, 4 feet deep, much like this shelter you see I'm in right now. Just dig it all the way back and keep on digging and go and get doors out of houses and fences and everything and lay them across it. And then put waterproofing in forms of plastic sheeting and tarps and shower curtains, anything over it. And then start putting 2 to 3 feet of earth in a mound over these things, over your doors that are straddling your narrow trench. It's like, yeah, you're in an area 3 feet by 4 feet, maybe 20 feet long, depending how many people you got in there. There's nothing to say that they can't dig that thing the entire 100 yards of the football field, and there can't be 20 families in there with like 8 different openings going in and out of it. And it's like, I don't want to do all that work. You know how hard it is to dig a hole? It's like, I want to go into the guy with the backhoe. It's like, hey, LA got nuked, DC got nuked, New York got nuked. It's like, how long before they think you nuked Detroit? Oh, I don't know, man. My family's scared. My wife is petrified. We're trying to keep the kids away from the television. And it's like, hey, man, here, I'm going to give you a copy of this book. You got enough, you get your backhoe. We're going down to the field, the football field at the intermediate school. And it's like, we're going to start digging trenches and we're going to start doing it. And we're going to let people replicate what we're doing. I'm going to tell them and show them, and we're all going to be there. And together we're all going to get through this. Now, I'm in a 4 foot by 4 foot by 8 foot radiation shelter. Does that mean I have to be in here all the time? No. I got a protection factor of about 250 to 300 in here. So I'm getting about 300 times less radiation that there would be outside. And all the people in this article in the comments all talked about England getting hit, London getting hit by a nuke and them being underneath it. They never once thought maybe Russia gets angry and nukes Berlin or Warsaw, and the winds are going in the right way that circulates the radiation back over London. You just need a fallout shelter for a lot of your situations. I can still come out of my shelter and go up and use the shower or the bathroom. I got water for that. I have alternative toilets. I got sitting next to me 80 gallons of water. I got more. This entire place is lit up off my battery bank that's not in here. It's 12 feet that way against the other wall. It doesn't have to be in here. This is just a spot where I can sleep and stay. And I got my different radiation meters. You got your little one that you sell? See, I got a carbon monoxide meter. I can heat myself with natural gas or propane down here. I got a couple different, radiation meters and everything else. So I can measure the radiation inside, outside, know what I'm getting inside, know what's outside and everything else. And it's like, maybe I only need to sleep in here. Maybe I spend 18 out of 24 hours in here. I can measure it and quantify it. And this just lets me, I don't have to live in here, but this just protects me from the radiation that's on the outside. Now, I benefit from having a basement. I'm not really anticipating Detroit being flattened by a blast. If so, well, I'm far enough away that, I might get all my windows blown out upstairs and a few other things, but, I probably won't blow the house over at 600 miles an hour. But in all my food and my other stuff, my flour and water and cooking oil and everything is all around me. In my water, it's all around me in layers such that it's radiation shielding. I got a 55-gallon barrel right here at the entrance right there. And that is on a dolly. So even if I wanted to prevent more radiation, make less radiation coming through this opening, I just pull the 55-gallon barrel on the dolly up to the opening. And I can block off the opening if I have to reduce the radiation coming in. And it's already holding my water. It's not even my primary water. So water is a very good radiation shield. You can do this with cinder blocks. You can do this with milk crates full of dirt. It's just endless the number of ways you can do this. You and I talked about me coming up there when we first started, and it's like, hey, let's make a shelter in your shop. Let's take a shelter right out of the book and let's adapt it for, in your shop and film the whole thing and show everyone that, you can do that.
And this is good information too, because it's just like any piece of gear. I mean, you can go out and buy the $100,000 bunker, which is fine. It's dual purpose, great quality stuff over at Atlas. But, it's just like you can spend $1,000 on a knife, or you can maybe spend $20 on a knife. It's not going to do the job perhaps as good. It's not going to look as nice, but it'll do the job. And I think what you're saying is important, because there's a lot of people right now who are on a very tight budget and they're worried about this stuff. And I think what you're saying is very reassuring to know that you can do this on a very limited budget if necessary. It really just is a matter of keeping yourself out of the radiation for the first couple weeks.
Actually, it's more like 3 days. Mm-hmm. No, I'm not saying that as a hard and fast rule of thumb for you to take to the bank, but the it says, the half-life is 4 days, or the half-life's 4 billion years. Which one's worse? The short half-life is the worst, and it dies off the quickest. And so the shorter the half-life, the more danger it is, but it's also the quicker you can come out of your shelter, because there's the less radiation that there is in the entire situation.
And I guess it depends on where on the map you are. It could be, it's going to depend on the proximity to the fallout.
Well, tell you what, here's the ultimate solution, okay? I got a vest for this little creature here, and I put this radiation
That's a different one from last time. Is that the same one that you had last time?
No, she died a year ago.
Okay.
Juliet died a year ago. Tier 1 Tabby died of kidney failure, but I can attach this radiation meter to her, and she's trained. I ring a bell outside, and there's treats. So she runs outside. The Geigercounter, actually the scintillator, reads the radiation. She comes back in when I ring another bell. I get the outside radiation measurement.
So but isn't the cat going to die then from radiation?
No. No, I just want to know how much is out there.
You just pissed off every cat lover on the channel. You realize that?
No, if you knew how spoiled this thing was.
Hey, you got to do what you got to do.
You're not going to get a lethal dose, pretty much. Even at 100 rads even 1,000 rads an hour, like full fallout from the missile fields. You got to be outside half hour or more to get a full lethal dose of radiation. I mean, literally, I can get up and go outside for whatever reason. If there's 100 millirads of radiation outside, which is busting the OSHA limit of 50 millirads a year in 1 hour, I can go outside. As long as I'm not inhaling the radioactive particles or drinking them or something like that, I'm absolutely positively, fine. I can go out and get radiation exposure. The numbers are 3, 25, and 100. You don't want more than 3 rads a day. You can do that every day for a long period of time. Crescent Carney and Edwin York and others have proved this. Ed set the number of the permissible exposure level for a fighter pilot at 25 rads, because that's where there was a biological blood detection change. And 100 rads of total exposure over like a day, a week, an hour, whatever, sometimes something short, not a year. 100 rads is LD 1%. That's where you are at a 1% chance of dying. That's where you're probably going to lose your hair and probably puke, is at a total dose of 100 rads in a short period of time, measured in hours, days, and or weeks. Not 100 rads over a year or over 10 years or over a lifetime. Despite what people think, the other thing, there's something called linear no threshold, which is false, which says radiation is cumulative throughout your entire life, and it's not. And linear no threshold says Okay, one person jumps off a 1,000-foot cliff, right? Are they going to be dead?
Probably.
No parachute, no wingsuit. One person jumps off a 1,000-foot cliff, they're dead. If 1,000 people, is linear no threshold says, then if 1,000 people jump off a 1-foot curb, one of them will die. So if you have 1,000 people jump off a 1-foot curb onto the street, do you think any one of them is going to die, Nate?
Yeah, if it's an old lady with a bad hip, possibly.
No, I'm talking about you and me. Not even better than me. And that's what it says. If one person dies, 1,000 rads, and 1,000 people get 1 rad, then 1 out of the 1,000 will die. And that, linear no threshold has been proven to be a myth, just like nuclear winter.
Is there any other considerations with that 72 pounds that you would advise people to do besides a shovel?
I would say spend the money and get an extra copy of Nuclear War Survival Skills to bribe the guy with the backhoe to dig the damn hole for you. I mean, literally, a guy with a backhoe, and you knock the doors out of your house using like a Diablo blade, just ripping right through the hinges. You can literally build that entire shelter. I mean, if you and I did that, I bet you and I could do it in less than an hour.
Really, just a few cents worth of diesel.
And a backhoe. Why use your hands when you can use power equipment, and you can get the power equipment for the price of, here, do you want an extra copy of this book? I need you to dig some trenches for me, and we'll dig some for you and your family.
I mean, these are things that I would say a person should do well in advance, but something like that is more impromptu, right? Like it's not, I
know, I mapped them all out. I had 12 of them mapped out within a mile of my house of where to go to get a backhoe.
Just holes that were pre-dug, or you're talking
backhoes to dig holes, trenches, to go to the football field and dig trenches, or to do it in my backyard or do it in their backyard. But principally, we're going to go to the football field and dig them up.
I mean, that is a solution, but it still is ideal to have something done in advance, right? Because you don't know if you're going to have enough time to dig or go and haggle with a guy who just happens to have a backhoe and is free that day. You want to do this ahead of time. If anything, even just pre-digging a trench and, whatever, there's all kinds of uses for, I guess, a hole in the ground.
I would do something inside your house first before I dug a trench outside. I mean, if nukes went off in Europe right now and I was with you, I'd go, come on, Nate, we're going to dig some trenches and everything else. If you were in an area. And those might not even be for you. Those might be for your employees. It might be for the neighbors around your business and around your house and everything else. If nukes were popping off in other places in the world, I would be digging trenches. If they weren't popping off like they are right now, I'd be doing some variation of this with buckets and dirt or cinder blocks or sandbags.
Inside the house is what you're saying.
Yes, inside the house. You can even do it in a closet underneath the stairs. Other people have reinforced cargo containers. Keep in mind, I said reinforced. You just can't bury a sea can, a cargo container. The walls will collapse in. Ask your buddy at Atlas. Also, I can't say enough good things about Atlas Survival Shelter. That man will give you, he wouldn't cheat you if his life depended on it, and he'd give you the shirt off his back.
He's a cool dude.
He is the best.
Okay, so in terms of, besides getting the book, then, is there anything else you can think of that, there's a wealth of information in the book, and
there is a whole section in the book on pre-crisis preparation. There's a whole section in the book on pre-crisis preparation. So you want to get, in advance of a crisis, what you can't get after the crisis happens. And I got one of the simplest methods of food storage for a person. And, when I thought I couldn't make it any simpler, I made it simpler. And it's on my website. And I call it the freezer method. So you go into, it's not Walmart where you're at. It's Canadian Tire, right? But you go to Walmart.
We have lots of Walmarts.
So you see all of these meats and cheeses that aren't refrigerated. They're hanging on hang tags and everything else. There's a bunch of shelf-stable food in there. And it's good for what? A year, 2, 5, 6 months? How long do you think that food is good for if you freeze it at -5 in a freezer?
A lot longer.
Decades, right? So the idea is you go to the store and you get a lot of these foods that are shelf stable and are usually pretty delicious. You're going to have what most people could consider snacks are going to become a meal, and you're going to freeze them. So when the power fails, all you do is open your freezer, because now they just begin their life as being shelf stable. And that is a very easy way to build up a month of food, or 2, or 3, or more. But first, let's get you started. Let's start with saying we want to have a good month. And you will literally see me in that video going through the store with my camera, showing you what I bought, me buying it, and me freezing the stuff and everything else, and why this is stable, why this is not. We have a lot of cheeses like Laughing Cow and Baby Bell cheese that are in the cooler section, but they're shelf stable. It's like eggs. Eggs are shelf stable, yet we have them in the refrigerated section all the time. It's just part of our culture. And in case anyone's wondering, she's getting love below the camera.
We can see her tail popping up. So, well, I want to thank you for coming out today. And I really would encourage people to go and check out this book and check out the previous videos that we've done with Steve. Where can people find more information on what you do?
The best way is at shop.harris1234.com. Or you can also just go to harris1234.com. There's a wealth of information. You can go to Nuclear War Survival Skills. That's with an S. Where's my book? Juliet? She was sitting on the book. So that with a www and a .com after it. You can go there, download the book for free. Like I said, there's no funnel. There's no upsell. There's no sign up. You can just download it. I pay for the bandwidth.
Download it, but make sure you have a paper copy, because you might not have the internet, or
if you want it right now, you can download it right now and buy a copy from Nate or Amazon or wherever you want.
Well, you can download it and print it off. I mean, if a person has a printer, they can do that, but that's kind of a pain in the ass too. So.
Well, the original copy is like 283 pages. I think this is 343 pages. But yes, if you want to print it off, because I have this thing printed on demand in 10 different countries. Yeah. So they'll print it and ship it to you right away. It's not going across the Atlantic or the Pacific to you. They even print it in Japan.
Good stuff. Well, I want to thank you for coming out today. And guys, make sure you go and pick up that book and check out those websites for more info. Thanks.
And if you're in Canada, I really want to encourage you to Nate's the one that brought you me. He's the one that brought you this information. It's a $20-something book, US. Please go get it from Canadian Preparedness. And you ship to the USA as well, even for free for like orders over a certain amount.
Yeah. So, there's lots of options for sure. But anyways, we got to get going here. So thanks a lot, Steve, for coming out.
Thank you very again for having me on, Nate. And remember, it all comes down to you wanting to survive and you finding a way and you figuring it out. It all comes down to your drive, your desire, your want. So please find it and use it.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.